Welcome to A Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach with Mark Gellard and Candy Reed, sponsored by the ERT 300. Well, what an honour it is. On this edition of Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach, we have the one and only Craig Boynton. His friends call him CB, and that's what we'll call him for the most part anyway today, unless things get very rigorous and unpleasant, which I'm sure they won't. CB, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I must say that is such an introduction with what you have with the music. I mean, it got me to attention. That was a very professional introduction. So now I'm on point. I got to be ready.
And now if you're watching on YouTube, you'd see Craig's name, and we're going to update the lower third down there with all the information of what Craig has achieved in his magnificent coaching career. And we have you on, Craig, like the other coaches that we have on, to talk about your career, your philosophy, the players you've worked with, and I'm sure you have lots and lots of great stories for us. Please tell us you do.
I do. I'll tell you that, sure.
All right.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start then. And we are hoping that Mark Gellard is going to join us. He's just coming hot and sweaty off the court in Florida. Do we find you in Florida as well? I don't know where you live.
Yes, I'm in Tampa. It's where I live, and that's where my couch is. And so that's where we both are.
It's pretty normal, isn't it? I think pretty much the whole tennis world lives in that part of the world. It makes sense. I think the weather's good, the airports are good, practice courts are rife, and practice partners are always on hand.
You tend to go where the sun is. So wherever there's sun, California, it's a good training block. Texas is a good place for tennis. Florida, obviously, you mentioned. So where it's sunny, you'll find tennis players for sure.
And we've got some of the list of names you've worked with, including, of course, Hubi Hurkacz, Jim Courier, John Isner, and Mardy Fish. Is there a particular player, Craig, that you are drawn to?
No, I'm drawn more to the personality, the person. I felt at the time when I was coaching John Isner that that was my calling in life. I was put on this earth to coach John. We got along great. We're still really close. We talk every week. And it was easy for me to see tennis through his lens. And it was easy for me to see his tennis through the lens of his opponent. So we got along maybe a little bit too close. We were really, really close. And, at the end, maybe we needed a little bit more separation. But, it was a fun time. John and I got along well. And I feel like even with others like Sam Querrey and Steve Johnson, I was just on the podcast, and I've worked a little bit with Jack Sock, and they have a podcast, Nothing Major. And I popped on there a few weeks ago, and it was great just to reconnect and the friendships and the bond and the stories. That's more of really kind of what makes me and allows me to go the extra mile with players, is the connection I have with them off and on court.
Mm. And it makes it so much better, doesn't it? Because I've said this on the podcast before, and we've spoken a lot with Mark and the other coaches we've been speaking to, how much time there is on tour when you're not on court. There's a lot of downtime waiting for matches to begin. At the end of matches, when the players with the physio practice, getting to the courts early a few days to get practicing. So you really have to have a chemistry off the court in order to make it work for both of you.
Well, the way things are going now, I was with the last charge I had with Hubi. I was with him way more than I was ever with my family from a time standpoint. And so you have the ability and the luxury time to get to know your player, but you also have to enjoy each other. Yeah. Because just as people, and you can agree to disagree, but you got to be able to have the communication. Most of the time we see eye to eye. We could finish each other's sentences, but it really is important that you enjoy and you respect and you like that person, because you are, like you said, you're with them in an ordered amount of time.
And it's not always going to work out brilliantly, isn't it? Because there's going to be matches where the player hasn't performed to your expectation. Perhaps you haven't given them the right ideas about when they were perhaps losing in a match, and they're going to feel bitter towards you. You're going to feel annoyed with them. These things are inevitable. How did you find you make up with them? How did you get over that little hump when it came?
Well, I've been fortunate to have really good relationships with most of everyone that I've worked with. And so having hard conversations is not a problem. If I did something wrong, I would own it. If I didn't do something up to snuff, I would own it. There were really no excuses. But it was more about coming up with a plan, agreeing on the plan, working the plan together. If things went off plan, it wasn't about blame. It was about, let's take a realistic look at what happened. Because when you go on a tennis court, a lot is out of your control. And what I always would tell players is that, look, you're stepping on a court against someone who's got an amazing set of skills, just like you do. And their skill set sometimes is going to beat you and win out on your skill set. But as long as you can win 53% of the points in that match, then I mean, I don't know anybody that's won 53% and lost. I mean, that's a pretty good number. And so respect the person that's on the other side of the net, because these players these days, to get to where they are, they have to do something freakish. They've got to be some freak in some way. And so it's the player's freak against the other player's freak, and you see whose freak wins out on that day. And as things that are pertinent to your player, tennis is matchup in the day. It might be a matchup that's not ideal, and that's fun because then you can get to the practice court and work on what adjustments you need to make, what additions you need to implement. And the day could be, you lost your luggage and you woke up with a cold, or you broke up with your girlfriend, or something along that line, which provides an opportunity then to get over that and face that adversity. Not only the adversity on the other side of the net with that freak that you're dealing with, but also the adversity inside of yourself. An opportunity to then master your thoughts and grow and become stronger, because what we're working for is evolution. We're working towards the better part of whatever that person's vision, whatever that person wants to become, whatever their goals are. So it's a never-ending journey, always bumps and bruises, which provide opportunities to grow and to be stronger.
Such a great answer. I love that it's a freak off. I was actually having a conversation with Tom Hill at the US Open. He's coach of Peyton Stearns now, formerly of Maria Sakkari. And I was saying naively, I think, actually, having spoken to him a bit longer, that I thought Peyton Stearns was a top 10 player. And he corrected me. He said, hang on a minute. I think she's a top 20 player, but to get into the top 10, you need something extra. It's that X factor. You've got to be a little obsessed, a little bit perhaps peculiar. I don't think that's the word he used, but there's something, isn't there, which gets the player to that exceptional level. Can you explain it more than a freak, having worked with Hubi, who's got into the top
Sure,
10? How does
sure. Well,
someone go from top 20 to inside that echelon of top 10?
so if you would, the way I look at it is that, okay, these players are very, very good players. So there's something that's holding them back, either mental, emotional, or physical. And so identifying what that X factor is, and then coming up with a plan. A lot of times it might be, if you're just working on the tennis these days, that's easy. Or that's the easier part. It's simple, but it's not easy. And so to go from inside the top 50, you got to be good, and you have to be somewhat consistent. And as you move up the ladder, you need to do what you do well a little bit better and a little bit more consistently. And then as you get into the 30s, same thing. And then the 20s, now it's where you start hitting your head when I started working with John, he was 18, and we could not get it above 18. We just keep hitting our head.
Yeah.
And it took a little bit of time, but it was the consistency factor. It was for him being able to play in Europe. And Courier, he coined it so well. You know, at that time, John played better when he had his driver's license as opposed to his passport. And so getting John to play better with his passport, and on the podcast, he's like, "Oh, I love the tournament in Paris, Bercy, at the end of the year." And I'm like, "Well, I was there early when so I want to call it now." But those are the little things. Those are the things. And as you get to the teams, now you've got to be able to do everything well, but it might not be in your hands because who you're playing against is just better at tennis. So then it's like, okay, I've heard stories back when Chrissy and Martina were practicing. They would go to the practice court and Chrissy would put in certain plays just for Martina. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if I read that. I don't know if that's true, but I identify that because she could beat most everybody with her A game, but against this opponent, I need to do something different and I need to do something special. And where you get to 15 in the world being the alpha, now you're not the alpha when you play someone in the top 10. And that's just the development and the evolution and the maturing process. That's so much fun because there's always more. There's always another plan. There's always more things to work on. And I always said the better you get, the better you have to be. So
Yep.
it's a reverse funnel. So as you go up the ladder, your material that you need to do gets greater. And so then you go all the way up and it's like, my goodness, I really have to do a lot of work, not only to maintain, but to push forward a little bit because it's that human nature where you're the hunted, where
Yep.
getting there, you were the hunter. So there's a mental aspect of it too, where you need to be, are you prepared? Are you prepared to be 10 in the world? You can go to bed at night and dream of winning the US Open, but are you really ready there to win the US Open are you prepared in the finals? And that's something that needs to be talked about and needs to be planned for, needs to be worked on.
And I suppose the higher you get, the more meticulous in your preparation and everything that goes with it has to be, like you said. So, given what you've just said, how do you account for Yannick Sinner's unbelievable 2024?
It's incredible. I have a funny story for Yannick. So in 2019 in Monte Carlo, Hubi lost on Sunday to Boynton 7-5 in the third. Boynton at the time was top 10, and it was on Sunday. And so after the match, I go over to the practice desk, and when you're out of the tournament, you're not a priority. So I said, well, I'd like to get 2 hours practice. And what time? And so, well, you can come at 7:30 in the morning. Okay, great. That's what we have. Do you have anybody available? And at the time, Coach was coached by Piatti. And
Yes.
Ricardo came over to me and says, I have a young boy. He's 16. And I said, all right, is he good? He goes, yeah, he's good. I said, all right, great. Hubi, you're hitting with a junior tomorrow. And Hubi, we didn't care at that point. We just wanted to hit. So lo and behold, it's Yannick Sinner. And Yannick comes out and he's thin to begin with, but you remind 2019, and we start hitting and we start playing, drilling and hitting. And I'm just kind of looking at this kid and like, are you sure you're 16? I'm like, what are you doing? And you're like, what's your junior ranking? He's like, no, I don't play juniors. I'm like, okay, that's good. But his level of concentration, he wasn't a junior in terms of his professionalism. We played for 2 hours, and I remember walking off the court with Hubi. I'm like, we are going to practice with him every single tournament that we're together because he's going to be really good. I'm like, I don't know how good he's going to be, but he's going to be really good, and we're going to kind of grow with him. and
Yeah.
was a really friendly guy. Worked hard, played amazing, no nonsense. He was like a 50-year-old in a 16-year-old body mentally. And lo and behold, he has the year that he has last year, which really wasn't a surprise. It was just a matter of time. Um, Seeing how he was when he was 16 it was like
Incredible.
something I'd never seen. That was freakish.
Yes.
And that was the freak part that I was able to see, and I was really grateful and fortunate to see when he was 16. So yeah, it's not a surprise, and I'm really really happy for him. And going back to our earlier point, what Yannick did is he learned the drop shot. He learned to slice. Darren and Simone improved his serve.
Yep.
So it wasn't just big power. And he might need the drop shot 1 or 2 points a set. But I think I heard that he's the first person in a gazillion years to never lose a match in straight sets in a year.
Oh.
So all these little things that you might not think are important can be just the difference between you winning the set and losing the set, just flipping it like that. And that's been fun to watch from a coaching standpoint, to watch all these things that he's added into his game.
I don't know if you've seen that video on social media of Yannick. He had the long hair. I think he was about 12 or 13 and he was volleying and he was a terrible volleyer. And I remember Jack Draper telling a story how I think he and another British boy had played 2 Italians and one was Yannick Sinner and they were going at Yannick Sinner because Sinner was the weaker player. And it does seem in a period of obviously from 12 or 13 to 16, there was a massive transformation. And then another one has just happened in the last couple of years.
It's been fun to watch. It really has. It's been fun to watch. So with Yannick now, Nick, this next year coming in, it's going to be the elephant in the room. It's the WADA decision, and
Yeah.
I think what I read is I think they're going to have some sort of conference about it in February, and the decision in April. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens for that young man and his future.
It's just incredible to me that he's had that weighing on his mind essentially since Indian Wells this year, and he's been able to have an extraordinary win-loss record. Just given what he's had to go through, I think I'd be a crumbling mess on the floor. I don't know about you.
Well, think about it. Like you've got that on your mind, and it's his whole future. It's all that he's lived for, and regardless of what happened
Mm.
or who's at fault or whatnot, but to be able to go into a mental room and lock the door, and to be able to drown out all that noise and just play and not lose in straight sets.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really impressive. That's freakish.
Yeah.
Really
Comes back
is.
to that word again, doesn't it?
That could be the single biggest, you just say, what's the best stroke or best that could be the single biggest weapon on tour right there, what Yannick did mentally.
Yeah. Mental strength is unbelievable. And of course, his movement is just something supreme. I wonder actually, what's the biggest advancement you've seen on tour since you began? I think, well, let's check with you first that your first huge coaching assignment was with Jim Courier. You were his traveling coach. And I know you've said you were so impressed by his drive and his ambition on court. And there must be a huge change, though, since the Courier days to 2024.
It's fun to look back because that's the benefit of being old, being around forever.
Which you're not.
um, um, is what Jim brought to the game was his physical fitness. Jim often said, anybody in this locker room can play a 5-set match. I'm the only one that can win a 5-set match tomorrow.
Mm.
So it was fun that Jim brought that. And whenever you have these athletes that bring something to the sport, you either catch up or you fall behind. So Jim brought that. And then you saw what Pete brought with his serving prowess. And then you see what Novak and Roger and Rafa, what they've brought. And everybody has had to catch up because you're going to get run over. And for the longest part of time, everybody did get run over. So what Yannick brings is an unrelenting pace of play and his movement in and out of corners.
Yeah.
He almost gets faster coming out of corners. It's incredible. And so what Yannick can do is he can beat you with power, or he can beat you with open court play, because I know I'm going to get out of that. Because if I change and I go down the line, I open the court on myself. But if I'm okay and I open the court on you, but I'm faster than you are, eventually I'm going to win the speed.
Yeah.
Oh, and then there's a ball. Okay, now I'm going to beat you with power. And so herein lies the dilemma. Do you play through the middle of the court and just tee it up for him where he doesn't have to move his feet? Or do you chance it and open up the court on him, but then you just open the court up on yourself? So this is what he has brought to the game. I mean, he's brought much more, but these are the two biggest things from a standpoint of game planning against and watching him on TV. You know, it's really interesting now. I'm home. I can watch these matches on TV, and I get such a different kind of angle and view of it than live, and I can see it from that way in real time. But he's a special kind of guy.
Absolutely. And of course, Jim Courier was a special kind of guy. He's become a fantastic commentator, hasn't he? Are you in touch with him quite a lot, like you are with John Isner and your other players?
No, I mean, I see him on the road.
Yeah.
Jim is absolutely, for me, the best at what he does. And what I love about Jim, and also Darren, is to just listen how they communicate information, how they construct a sentence, they build and they communicate the information. I love that, and that's something that I wish I could do as well as they could. And also, what Jim is saying is spot on.
Yes.
He's incredible at what he does. He's the best in the business for sure.
There's not many other great ex-players that can communicate so well and are so good on camera. It's not an easy transition. We often see perhaps some of the best footballers in the world, and I'm talking soccer, not becoming the best coaches. There are a few of them, but it seems like some players find it so easy to get to the top of the game that they can't actually understand why others don't find it. But Jim seems to have that natural ability, doesn't he, to understand what we are looking at home if you're not a tennis expert.
Well, I think that speaks to the way he played too, because he was kind of blue collar, and he had a big forehand, but nothing came easily to Jim. And you look at some of the best basketball coaches that have come through. There are ones that made the team but weren't stars.
Yes.
And had to kind of figure things out around how to play chess a little bit. And then you have the ones like that are just crazy talented, that it just came easy to them and they didn't have to do that. Their freak was so freak that they were playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. So I think it also goes to how you were successful in your craft.
So that brings us nicely on. Thanks for the transition, Craig, because let's talk about your career. You played at college as well. Would you recommend that for most tennis players coming up these days?
It's really simple. I always say, if you're in high school and you're winning challengers, then that's a really good kind of cutoff point. So if you're winning challengers and you're successful in challengers, then yes, I think it'd be a good idea to sort out an agent and then see what's going on from there. This is when you're in high school.
Yes.
If you're not, then college absolutely needs to be in the equation. And talking with John Isner and Stevie Johnson, who also I worked with, and for a short time at the tail end of his career, I helped James Blake. And to a man, they all said I would not have had the professional career that I had I not go to college. James went 2 years at Harvard, Stevie 4 years at SC, John 4 years at Georgia. And that just allowed them to be able to get in the weight room every other day, to build their body, to build their game. And the great thing about college is you could lose the match on Tuesday and you can be the hero on Friday or Thursday.
Yeah.
In pros, if you lose, you've got to wait a whole week and then you got to travel. And so it's a completely different lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle that takes some time to get used to. And it's not, and if you're not winning and you're not showing promise, it can kind of overtake you sometimes and be difficult.
I agree with that. I actually played 4 years at the University of Tennessee. As you can see, my ginger cat behind me. He always seems to get
Yes,
into the
Voles.
picture. I've
I
got
like
my
it.
dog on my lap and my
Oh,
cat's to the side. So everything's going on.
awesome.
YouTube viewers can watch the animal procedure. But yes, I played at the University of Tennessee, and it actually did the opposite for me. It showed me that I wasn't good enough to go pro, and actually I needed to do something else. So it can go two ways, I suppose. And
Okay.
you went to, did you go to Clemson? I
I
read
went
a
to
couple of different things.
TCU for 2 years and then transferred to
Okay.
Clemson.
Oh, so
And
both were right. Okay.
yeah, and so it was funny. I never really intended to be a coach. And my senior year, this is when I look back and think, okay, when was the first time where you thought that you'd be a coach? And I'm thinking back and I'm like, it's my senior year. And I'm having a good year. I mean, I'm winning almost all my matches and I'm winning them at 2. And my roommate Brian Page is playing number 1, and Brian had the game where he could beat the number 1 guy in the country. He could lose to the number 6 guy from Sisters of the Poor. He just had one of those games. And so what winning easily or efficiently allowed me to then help Brian. And I didn't really know much about the X's and O's. I knew how he played. I knew what was the best way for him to play, to commit to play, because he had a really high risk game. And I told coach, keep me at 2. And the courts 1 and 2 usually played next to each other. And
Yes.
so I could keep my eye on Brian. And let's just say that Brian's style of play didn't need a lot of second guessing or like this, like he needed to play full out. And if he hit the back fence, hey, commit to hit the back fence again, because he could get on a run and just absolutely blow through people, but not if he was tight.
Yes.
And so I just was like, you just play your way. We got you. No problem. I'm going to win. Don't worry about you. And he was the first person that I would go to after I played if we weren't playing next to each other. And so that was my first recollection of having kind of the coaching gene, where it wasn't about my vision for him, what made me feel good. It was about the vision for him that gave him the best chance of success. What was the best plan for him given his game? His game style was completely opposite of mine. And so was just encouraging him to play his game style and play his way. And then I don't know, I just kind of bumbled along, and how many years later here I am talking to you. So it's just kind of one thing happened to another, from another to another to another, and I've been really lucky, really fortunate to be around some great people and learn some great people. But that was my first recollection of having kind of the coaching gene pop out and getting on the coaching hat on.
My dad always said you make your own luck, and I think I'm a big believer in that. Of course, some things are completely out of your control, but I think one of the first things that I think about you, CB, and I've done a lot of commentary when Hubi's been playing and mentioned you, and you're very noticeable. We also noticed that the beard's a little bit trimmer these days, but you're very noticeable. But you're also so fun, so pleasant. I think the first time I met you was in Basel, 2023, and you just come across as such a lovely, friendly chap, which isn't that common amongst professional athletes and coaches. There's a lot of heads going down when somebody doesn't recognize somebody, but you're so personable. So I can totally see why players would ask you to coach them. So go through the coaching journey then. You've done that stint at college tennis. What's next?
So then what did I worked at Saddlebrook, and I was brought in primarily to be Jennifer Capriati's hitting partner. So at the end of my career, I was going to play, which was satellites, circuits. They
Yes.
weren't futures. And so I knew the guys from Bardmore. They moved over to Saddlebrook, and I said, "Hey, can I come up and hit?" They, yeah, but I got to put you on a court with a 13-year-old girl. I'm like, okay, whatever. And started hit with Jennifer, and she's good. I'm like, yeah, this is
She's quite
great.
good.
I didn't mind. Yeah, it was awesome. And so then we got along, and then they hired me, and then I moved off to Cincinnati and worked at a club, and all my kids were there, born there. Got back on the road a little bit with Mardy, moved back down to Florida to take over the academy and touring pro division at Saddlebrook, and met John, helped John organize his practices for about a year and a half, and that was really huge because I got to know John. And so then when John asked me to start working with him, I sat him down and I go, "We're working on these 5 things because this is what you're lacking. I've been watching your matches for a year and a half." And so we really hit the ground running. And then from there, worked a bit in the USTA with Stevie Johnson and Jack Sock and Donald Young, and then went privately with Stevie and Sam Querrey, and that was a blast. Those two guys together, Sam Querrey. I tell you what, if anybody's listening to this and you have a chance to interact with Sam Querrey, do it. He's like Larry David. It's his. He had me in stitches the entire time we were together. Just so
Brilliant.
much fun. And Stevie and I were kind of the same. We're more, believe it or not, we're more reserved. But Sam is the type that gets in and he pulls things out of you. And so he's always the center and he's always the life of the party. Not trying to be, he just is. And so Steve and I would be at breakfast and we would be like, "Hey, how you doing? Good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know,
Bit tired.
Sam would come in and all of a sudden it's a party. Stevie and I are interacting. We're going. And it was just a lot of fun. And Christian was the physio, Christian Lacasio. And for about 3.5, 4 years, man, we just had the best time. And the boys did well. And then I stopped with Sam. And then Hubi slotted in Sam's spot. And then later on, I stopped with Stevie, and then for the 5.5 years, it was just Hubi and me traipsing around the world together.
And you did pretty well, didn't you? Top 10, a couple of Masters titles, 8 titles overall with you two. Why did it go so well?
Well, I think it was a combination where we just kind of fit. I talked earlier about if the connection is there, and we had a really strong, good connection. We understood each other. We trusted each other. We had really open, honest conversations. He was so sweet. Like I would come in and take the blame for a loss, and he wouldn't let me do it. It just worked. It just worked. And then I'm sure people are like, "Well, why doesn't it continue to work?" And I'll say, look, these professional relationships have a shelf life. They just do. And it's not anyone's did something wrong. All my guys that I have stopped with, I still get along really well with. I still pick up the phone or call them. And even with John, when we were so close, it's just a shelf life. It just doesn't go on forever. I've been really fortunate and blessed to be able to go longer than the average is. Whatever, I think it's a little over 2 years or 2 years. And so from that, I think that's just because of the relationships that we have forged together, all the guys. And I look back fondly on everyone that I've coached.
Well, that's so lovely to hear. You and Hubi together for 5.5 years. As you said, most coaching player relationships don't last that long. And it's just great that you can all get along at the end. Anything in the pipeline? Anybody you're looking at coaching in the future, or perhaps you've got someone already?
No, I mean, right now I'm just going to be dad. I'm going to be husband, and I'm going to be on my couch for a bit of time. I've been kind of on the road since '09, and so I think it's the gift that I'm going to give myself, and I hope my family sees it this way though, is the gift of stillness. I want to be there for them. I
Yes.
want to. I want to be able. My dog now is starting to kind of like come up to me more. I think she's starting to realize that, hey, it's just not going to be 2 weeks and I'm out. And I'll have the itch again. But what I'm looking really interesting to do is I would love to bring guys in for training blocks here in Tampa and Saddlebrook, give them the information, pass on the information that I've ascertained, help them with all the questions or ideas or how, and impart the wisdom that I've learned and gathered, and be able to have them see things through a different lens that would
Yep.
be a positive lens. That's what I'm most excited for in the short term. I mean, I don't. If you know anybody, send them my way. I don't have anything set yet, but really, that's what I'm looking forward to do in the interim until the family's like, all right, it's time for you to get out of the house.
The dog's ready for you to move on.
Yeah.
Well, delighted to say that Mark Gellard has joined us from off the tennis court in Florida. He's been working hard. Pre-season about to begin with his player Magda Linette. Mark, can you hear us?
I can, and I hope you can hear me. And sorry to be late. And I was listening here for the last 5 or 10 minutes to Craig. So, Craig, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So,
sorry,
Mark,
I couldn't get there quicker.
No, don't be silly. You've got a job to do. We quite understand. I'll tell you off after we've stopped recording, so CB doesn't hear this. But we've gone through a few of CB's stories, his coaching journey up to just finishing up with Hubi Hurkacz recently. So, Mark, you can get into the nitty gritty and ask the difficult questions now.
Well, obviously, I mean, I saw what a great job Craig did with several of his players, obviously John and with Hubi now. And funnily enough, I got a phone call from Hubi about a week ago. He's actually in Delray right now doing his off season, and Magda was asking me if I had some places I knew he could stay, because he's coming in with obviously his physiotherapist and things like that. So he's down actually here in Florida at the moment training. But I suppose my what I want to know, and Craig, you and I shared some time together at the United Cup about 2 years ago, which was, for me, it was a great experience. But I just wanted to see, as a coach, what was sort of the biggest things that you feel, or the philosophy that you have as a coach that you take on to the court with every player you're working with? Is there what kind of coaching style do you have, or philosophy would you say you adhere to when you're on court with players of all ages and abilities, really?
I would say for my personality, first and foremost, I'm more of an empathetic coach. I'm more of an understanding. I get how hard this is. That being said, I also try to, as quickly as I can, get an understanding of the person, how they like to be communicated, directly, indirectly, how they discern information, what are the issues that are holding them back, how quickly can we have honest conversations if it's uncomfortable for them. So I really try to work around the personality and the person. And so my decision of what I say, how I say it, how long I say it, it's almost always mapped out in my mind. And it depends upon how I can get the best effect. Can the person really hear the message that I'm saying? And if they don't understand it or hear it, then that's my problem. It's my bad. And then I've got to get a deeper understanding of them. So I really try to dive all into the person first, or as I dive into the tennis. Because I've learned that these amazing tennis players are people first. And in order to help the tennis player, I need to understand the person. Jim wanted more directness. Sam did better. Query with Jim Courier I was talking about. Sam Query did better with a more indirect, softer approach. Stevie was kind of both. John responded to tough. I think that's because those guys went to college and they understood playing for someone other than themselves a little bit more. So it really, my approach, it really is dependent upon the person and how well I can craft the message and also the information.
That's interesting. When you, obviously I'm working on the WTA side, but on the ATP, do you find, how much work do you put into the opponent you're playing? If you're playing somebody Monday, how much time do you put into studying the opponent and crafting a game plan to play against them versus focusing on your own game and strengths and weaknesses? Because I found that it's something that's changed. My philosophy has changed and evolved over the years with that. How do you operate in that regard?
That's a great question. So again, for me, it's always been about the individual. And there are times where showing video to the player would only confuse them because they played more from a feeling of artistic veins, if you will. You look like someone that's real passionate, real emotional. It's tough to give them structure. And then there are others on the opposite end, like an Andy Murray. He wanted every single crumb of information. And I don't know at some point if that was too much, but when I would go to scout, I have a pretty good idea of who I'm working with and their weapons. And tennis is matchups in the day. And what I mean by matchups is how do I position the person that I'm coaching to get the ball, the X ball that they want in order to finish the point. The best situation that they have their weapons up against non-weapons because they don't really have a lot of weaknesses. And I've always found that when I scout, I watch 5, 10, 15 minutes and that's it. I'm good because I don't need to keep watching to get an answer that I already know. And I can remember Hubi was playing in Miami, and with guys that serve big, okay, you're gonna most, if you're served well or decent, you're gonna hold. So it's where the opponent generally likes to serve, so their tendencies, and I'd always say, hey, look, here are the tendencies, but so I didn't get trapped in a corner. They said they were going to serve out wide every deuce. But then it's like, okay, this is where you want to serve where you want to serve if you're serving well. But it's when the ball was in play, and so I came up with, hey, Hubi, hit this ball one time. You're going to get this shot, and then if you make it, the point's going to be over. If you don't, okay, well, the ball's still on your racket. So I didn't need to go into a lot of detail. There was one play that he could run over and over and over again, and then to keep it simple. So that's most of the guys that I've worked with just want one or two simple plays that they can run because they're so offensive. And they're going to have the play on their racket most of the time anyway. And so it's just one or two things that they can think of if they need it. And then just keep the clarity and keep the commitment and let them go.
And obviously, for me, the WTA, as I shouldn't say obviously, but the WTA in many ways is it follows the ATP, whether it's from a technology standpoint or innovation, everything on and off the court. What do you see as the future of coaching? Because for me, I think the way that we're going to coach in 50 or 100 years' time is going to be very different to what we've been doing and what we do now. It's going to evolve. Do you feel the same way? Do you think it's going to change? Do you feel there's areas where we're really good and areas where we're really bad?
I think what's going to happen with the evolution of technology, it's going to really help the way that you see things during play. And case in point, we were talking earlier, Jannik Sinner in and out of corners. If you have the technology to see just exactly what his speed is, and then you can rate your speed, that's something where it's going to help. The technology is definitely going to help. But we can't get too far away from the actual coaching of things. And there was a baseball catcher, Yogi Berra, who's really simple, and he was from the Yankees. And I think Derek Jeter, who was a Yankee great, maybe the greatest Yankee of all time, or certainly on the list, and he did an interview. And, baseball has all these analytics. I mean, you're not going to find a sport with more technology. And Yogi said, when I was scouting the opposing pitcher, I just looked at his bullpen. If he's throwing a lot of fastballs and sliders, I just was waiting for the fastball and slider. And so at some point, we can't lose the simplicity and the actual keeping things simple and getting to the base of, you hit the ball here, the ball comes here, this is what you want to do, because every sport is a chess match. And tennis is the ultimate one-on-one chess match. And so from that standpoint, I don't think it's going to vary too far from that. Now, where I think we're in trouble is this on-court coaching. I think the on-court coaching, although I know why they did it, and everything is done with the perfect purpose in mind, I think if it were to be a couple of things, but now what happens is you see the players looking over at the box after every point, and they want all the answers. And there's a continual conversation going on. And the issue that I have is most of the coaching boxes are right in the middle of the stands. And it would be like, okay, you look at who's the most famous coach in a league. Think about the people listening at home. And think about it, if that coach is literally in the stands with the fans and trying to coach a game, it's mind-boggling to me. And not only that, now you've got the friends and the family, and which they absolutely need to have a space for them there. But the coaching boxes need to be the coach, the physio, maybe the mental, whoever, 2, 3, 4 max, and it needs to be courtside where you're away from the fans. There, you saw this, I think this year at the US Open, where the coaching box, and they had fans of the opposing player right next to the coach, and he's like, hey, I'm just trying to do my job here. And it turned it almost to a fist fight. And I look at this and I'm like, how far behind the times is this sport? So that it's starting to turn into a soap opera for me, and I think that piece of it really needs to be buttoned up quickly, in my opinion.
Mark, before you jump back in again, this is something actually, Craig, we were talking with Brian Shelton about a few podcasts ago, and Mark and Brian were very funny because Mark in particular was talking about fighting off a 15-year-old girl who wanted a selfie while he was trying to discuss tactics with Magdalene, and the conversation between them two really was where the coaches are sitting. Brian said at the end of the court is much better because you get a much better view. And also, of course, you've got problems with other people all around. Mark, you can elaborate more on what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I mean, I echo the same sentiment, because I think I'm a proponent of coaching in tennis. I think that, and I've noticed, which did surprise me, that I'm in the minority. A lot of coaches don't like the coaching part and don't want to have it in matches, which is surprising to me. But I am in favor of it, and my concern is, and I said this when we were discussing with Brian, is exactly what you said, that if they value coaches, they need to put us in a proper place where we can do our job and coach on court efficiently. Because for me, I said it's only a matter of time before the WTA is going to start charging me an attendance fee to be in the stadium. I mean, it's getting that ridiculous. I mean, really, it's a matter of time, because they take more and more things from us in that regard. And you would not, Pep Guardiola would not accept sitting in amongst the fans while he's coaching Manchester City.
Exactly.
So why am I expected to do this?
Right.
And then we hear this continual, well, the player's health and mental welfare. Well, the person that's probably the most important to the player is the coach, because we spend the most amount of time with them. Well, then show us the respect to put us in a place where we can do our job and help the players most efficiently. But I completely agree. And going back to the beginning of that question, with Magda, one of the things I've realized, and I don't necessarily do it, but I have realized, is that when we're in practice, and if I ask her, why did she do something? My question is, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision to do that? And there's always needs to be a second part to that question. Is, first of all, why did you do it? But the second part is, that what do you feel? And the feel part is really important, especially on the women's side, because sometimes they'll make a decision, a logical or a not logical decision. But it's more important is, what did they feel in that moment? And that's something that computers, technology, all that innovation so far hasn't really scratched the surface, because what they're feeling tends to be much more important than what they were thinking at that moment.
Yeah, you make a great point. And I see a lot of there's a decent amount of the men's tour going to that also. And what you're saying is, you have decisions that are born and executed for a reason. And what's driving that? What's the motivation? And a lot of times it's because of a feeling. It's not necessarily because of a thought or a tactic. And so what did you see? And then that is more of a hard line. I see something, I'm going to make the decision. Okay, then what did you feel? Well, I felt at this point, and feelings are tricky because feelings can lie. And so it's that balance between, are you locked in? Do you see it? Or whatever feeling you have. And for the most part, most of the feelings are negative. I mean, you see people, yeah, I've got a feeling, I'm running on adrenaline, I'm pumped up, I'm ready to go. I'm like, hey, that's great, keep that up. But a lot of it is, it's fear. They go into the future, or they're stressing in the past. They're not in the present. What if is a lot of time. And so they make a decision, and that's why in between the points is so important. So if they don't clear that mechanism and they bring that into the next point, then you have a decision that they've made. And as a coach, you look and go, okay, we don't really practice that. So where is that born? Where is that decision born? And it's usually born out of just what you're saying, as a feeling. And if you can get to the feeling, then you can get to the thought that created that feeling. Because feelings are just feelings. They just are. Thoughts are just thoughts. They just are. There's no life to them unless we give them life. And the greatest competitors have learned to talk to the brain instead of listen to the brain. And this is mental toughness. And this is something that's really, really difficult to do. It's really difficult to do. I mean, everybody out there listening, I'm sure, has some, in one way, shape, or form, some experience with this. And to be able to just shut out what you're feeling and basically program yourself what you're going to do. It's a bit robotic, but I mean, you got to be that way if you want to be successful in kind of any one-on-one activity. And therein lies your point, is that what are you feeling and where did that come from? And those are fun conversations if you can have really open and honest conversations. But it's tough because you're vulnerable, and it's tough to really want to share feelings a lot of times. And I get it. And this goes back to the relationship. If you have a good relationship, they trust you, you trust them, then you're in the tent, if you will, you're their safe space. Then you can really kind of get to these important moments. And I have a couple of stories where I was able to, not so much with emotion, but you have these moments where you've been working so hard on this one aspect, and you talk about it and you go and you work and it comes good in a match. And that's what gets me out of bed to go coach. And, with John, it wasn't Wimbledon. I could spend 10 of these hours with you on that one match at Wimbledon 70-68.
Which match?
But yeah, exactly. Was 2009 quarterfinals in DC. And we had just kind of been starting, and John was kind of new to it. And John would have a cow every time he got a serve broken. And I said, dude, like, if you're going to break a racket every time your serve is broken, Prince doesn't have enough rackets. These guys are good. And we would battle on competing, and we would battle on, look, next point. Let's not bring what happened. Let's leave it. And we really went after each other, not after each other, but like, I was holding him accountable, as coaches should do. And John allowed me to do that. And he's playing a match in the quarterfinals in 2009 against Tomasz Berdych. And John's already having a good tournament. He's up 6-4, 5-4, serving 40-15. Okay, great. This is great. Okay. Well, what time are the semis? Gets broken. Okay. Has 5-6 match points in the tiebreaker. Loses the tiebreaker. So now at this point, I'm going worst case scenario with the post-match speech of everything that he did right. And he's down 15-40 at 1-all. And I'm like, okay, I got to get this right. I'm practicing this speech. Lo and behold, he wins 6-3. Walk into the locker room. I'm just standing there. He walks up next to me. He's getting stuff out of his bag. Doesn't really look at me. I'm getting goosebumps telling the story because it's so powerful. It just says, I didn't bat an eye, did I, CB? And I'm like, I'm going to start crying. Like, that's what coaching does. That's right there. For me, that story is greater than any of the, it's great that you win titles and it's great that you win matches. But when you're able to help change for the better, and you stand your ground, and the player allows you for you to be accountable, that is by far one of my greatest moments in coaching that nobody would have ever known.
Yeah.
Just that one didn't bat an eye. Yeah. And those are the ones that I try to grab for all my players. So
Nick Horvat told a similar story. We had him on. He's just stopped as the coach of Donna Vekic because his wife is pregnant with twins. So he's decided to leave the WTA Tour for a bit. But he's told a similar story to that one, in that she had dropped down, she'd lost some ranking points and had dropped down to the challenger level. And she was about to win a challenger final. She'd had all the pressure on her because, of course, she was the big name. She was 6-2, 5-1 up. 2.5 hours later, she won the match in 3 sets.
Yeah. Good.
And he said he was never so proud of anyone in his entire life. And the lessons he learned from her winning that, he said, was it had been 3 years in the making of eating the right food, of going to sleep at the right time, of turning the television off, putting the hard work in. And he said that is what tennis is all about. It's not about tomorrow. It's about 3 years from now. What are you going to do up to that point to get there? Is that something that you can also understand?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And what he's talking about is coming out with a plan and commitment and dedication. And everyone's plan is different, and everyone's commitment needs to be the same. And the sacrifice, these young men and women. It's funny. I was also thinking about this story with Jim. Jim Courier was watching, this is a few years ago, himself play back when he was in his 20s, and he said, I don't recognize that guy. And basically what he was saying was he was so committed, he was so tunnel vision, he turned the TV off, we didn't have cell phones back then, but he was so committed. He did an extra rep. Whatever he was given to do in the gym, he did it twice. And it's such a commitment. It's such a sacrifice. I mean, that's a great set. That story warms my heart too, because I'm sure there were some doubts after she lost that second set. And there you go. Are you in the past, or are you staying in the present and you're battling? And that's another one. And that I would hope that story allowed her to spring forward and gobble up months of training, and then be able to learn that lesson and take that forward. Because when you win 2-1, that's great. But when you win that way, that really strengthens your resolve.
Yeah, she's done okay. Semi-final at Wimbledon this year and final in the women's singles competition at the Olympic Games. So it's a pretty good year for Donna Vekic.
That's an amazing year. An amazing year.
Mark, over to you.
No, I think you're 100% right. Coaching is just a lot of moments. You know, you're always trying to find those coaching moments where something happens like that you can use it as a springboard to move forwards, or as a way to demonstrate what all the hard work was for. There's a great book called How We Learn to Move, but I think it's Rob Gray that wrote it. I need to check on the name, but he sort of talked about the 20, 30, 40 years ago, the sort of Eastern Soviet bloc, the most important part of coaching was just training repeatability. So we do a lot of basket feeding and things like this with repetition. And now the sort of modern coaching and thinking or thought process is not repeatability, but adaptability. Trying to create athletes that are adaptable, that can adapt to so many different situations, different countries, different balls, everything. And I think as a coach now, that's the way I try to work on the court. And when I'm dealing with Magda or other junior players I help, is trying to create players that use their personality strengths to help them on the court and how they play. Because I think in the past, even for me as a coach and for you, you have to coach with your personality. You coach within your personality. I can never be Craig Boynton. I will never be as relaxed or as empathetic. I will never be that guy. And as much as I would like it a lot, I can't. And so I have to, coach to my strengths. And I think that's something I've definitely learned in the last couple of years. Is like you've said there. I think that's why you did such a good job with I think Hubi and Jim Courier are about as opposite as they can get on the scale of personalities, from what I can tell from outside. And notwithstanding that, I think you've been out. You demonstrated you were able to coach both of them at the highest level. So it's a testament to your personality and character as a coach to be able to adapt to the players. And I think that's a really hard skill as a coach to teach people. I hear some coaches come to me, and young coaches, I want to be on the tour, I want to coach. What's the biggest thing? It's not teaching forehands and backhands. That's probably the easiest thing we do. It's being able to be adaptable and versatile to the player you're working with.
You bring up a great point, and it reminds me, if anybody that wants to be a coach, what I've seen, and I was guilty of this, is when you get into the coaching business, you have a tendency to coach how you were coached, or you coach the way that which is the way that you played. And if you would stop and look at the successful coaches, is they have the ability to look through the lens of the player and see what they see, and be able to then adapt and add to what is best for them, and always adhere to the number one rule of coaching is it's not about the coach, it's about the player. And the number two rule is if you're confused, revert back to rule number one. And so once you're able to kind of make that transition and that migration to that, now you're on your way to being able to help most anyone, because that's the framework and that's the blueprint of it. And for you young coaches and you young wannabe coaches, my suggestion is when you get to a place of that you're coaching or you're working with someone, I would ask a ton of questions, and I wouldn't come to any kind of conclusion until you have a 360 evaluation of everything, because what you might think is X isn't even close to X. And so if you go in thinking, and I had people all the time stop me and they see Hubi play or they see someone play on TV. Well, it's like, why don't you do this? And I'm like, that's a great idea. And, you know, who actually turned me onto that idea was Brian Barker, who was James Blake's coach. And I don't know if you remember, you know, they would bang on James a lot for playing a certain way. And Brian's like, hey, don't you think we've tried it the other way? Yeah. It's like, we've done this, we've done the stats on it, but this is the best way for James. And Brian would just smile and go, yeah, maybe we'll try that. But, you know, that's really the degree as you start kind of going up the ladder of honing your coaching craft. It's really just putting that person in the spotlight and doing everything that you can to help that person. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I wonder if CB, one of the questions that people that didn't know you and Hubi particularly well was, why can't he win a set without having to play a tiebreaker?
Yeah, that was, well, he was going to hold serve. Okay, let's just put it this way. He was going to get to 6 on serve. But, you know, if you know Hubi, you know, Hubi is a kind of an unassuming guy. He's not a put the hammer down kind of guy. But when it came down to it, he won a lot of those tiebreakers.
He sure did.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I just didn't do a good enough job helping him with his return. So that was on me. You're right, guys. Should have been 4-4. I should have been better.
I tell you one thing, from sitting in the coaching seat, I have yet to lose a match when I'm watching Magda.
Undefeated.
Yet to lose one. I'm undefeated.
Before we let you go, CB, because we've had over an hour of your time, you've been extremely generous. We spoke before the podcast about what you wanted and from me, really, and I'd love to hear a few more stories because I know you have a big personality. You've had such a fantastic career. The players you've worked with have been awesome. And you told us some magnificent stories, but I bet there was a couple of humdingers that you'd like to give us on Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach.
Well, I'll tell you the other story with Stevie Johnson and the moment. And so when I started working with Stevie, he didn't really have a great backhand. It's the way it was. And so I said, you know, how do we flip the script on this? And so I started watching video of Steffi Graf. And so we were on a practice court in Bordeaux, who actually, if you ever get a chance, go to Bordeaux. That's actually my favorite tournament. And I said, Stevie, why don't we come with the narrative that you've got the best slice backhand in the world? And that's all you're going to hit. And let people and we're going to develop the pattern of your slice is going to feed your forehand. And he got to 20 in the world. And, you know, I always wanted him to hit a one-hander. I encouraged him to hit the one-hander. So that kind of went back to that other moment. So, you know, I was thinking, you know, some funny moments. And I'll tell you something that never happened to me before, ever. And it actually happened to Hubi and I in our last tournament. So it was first round, and match started at 11. And for those of you at home, there are certain details you take care of before a match. You have your warm-up, you have your equipment, you have your food, you have your tennis warm-up, but you also have your dynamic warm-up, and you have your speech with your coach. So when you go on at 11, you know when you play. So I said to Hubi, you know, how do you want the day to go? How do you want the morning to go? So I went and grabbed his rackets first. He has 6 rackets restrung. And he liked to grip his rackets kind of in silence, so you put the headphones on. So did that. Then he did a kind of a dynamic warm-up. He put his rackets up in the locker, and the lockers at the U.S. Open are stacked, and the top ones are like 8 feet high. They're really high. And so then we went out and warmed up, and he came back and stretched, and he didn't have to deal with food because he's at 11. So we sit down, we start talking about the match, and he wanted to talk about the match right before we went on court. So no problem. So he gets everything going there at Hurkacz, court, whatever. And so, we fist pump. He gets his bags ready, and he gets ready to walk out. Got everything on, bags, racket bag, and he goes to shut the locker so they could lock it. And he looks up, and there are all 6 of his rackets that are sitting there. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and we both just start laughing because we both can picture him getting on the court and going to warm up and not having any rackets. And him coming to me and say, CB, I don't have any rackets. And I'm like, what is the protocol on that? And me just hightailing it back to the locker room. And then I can't reach up there. So I'm going to have to get the attendant and give it like a 10-finger boost to grab the racket and then run back to the courts. And in this moment of him looking at me, we're just looking at each other laughing. We both saw the same vision of what could have happened. So that has never happened to me. And that's just kind of a funny story. And it happened on our last tournament together. So just wanted to share that.
Oh, that's superb. And during the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, we've been running some tickers right at the bottom. And there's so many lovely quotes. John Isner said about you, CB, you're so witty, one of the wittiest guys I know. You always had a quick quip to come back at you. Ask anyone, John Isner said. The guy is hilarious. It does help having a sense of humor, doesn't it?
Well, you have to enjoy what you do. And John was very gracious with that. But John and I I was like the cool uncle or like the cool big brother. We got along great. We understood each other well. He had me in stitches. I had him in stitches. We just knew each other's humor. So better to laugh than cry.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that is a wonderful way to end this edition of Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. Craig Boynton, you have been an absolute pleasure, a wonderful guest. I know that Mark Gellard and I would love to have you back. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. My pleasure, guys.